Oh hi, thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
Okay, alright, we're back, and it's technically still May. Where have I been? Well, I've been buried under a pile of laziness, procrastination, burnout, sleep deprivation, parenthood, and an endless job search that's slowly draining my will to live. But I promised a May video, and here we are. It's currently May 31st as I write this script. I was up until about 4 AM debugging last night, and I've had about 2 hours sleep, and boy do I have no idea what I'm doing. This video is hard to make because what I've been working on is taking the ARCHIVIST system, the procedural lore and generation tool that I mentioned in this video, from a very abstract state to as concrete a state as I can possibly get it with all the lack of sleep and coffee crawling through my veins. Which means all I've been doing is programming, blah, blah, blah. And after thousands of lines of code, I have maybe just enough to barely show you. But I've written a lot of documentation, thought a lot about a lot of different things, and decided what this is going to be. A simple video where I take you through my current concrete implementation and thought process and mistakes of ARCHIVIST. Fair warning, probably all of this will be screenshots and probably all of it will have horrible default transitions like a Windows Vista high school PowerPoint presentation, because if you think I'm hand keyframing stuff for this, you are wrong. Here we go. Okay, so last time I talked a bit about entities and I even had a basic implementation, but little did I know that what I had was bad and dumb, and that the implementation was bad and dumb, and I was bad and dumb, so basically I threw everything in the bin and started from scratch. Entities are one of 2 basic building blocks of the system. They encompass absolutely anything that the player will be interacting with. I have a main class and then derive it into different subclasses to hold specific information. So at its core, we have characters, items, and locations. But I'll probably be adding more abstract ones like factions and things like that, maybe. As mentioned previously, they can either be static, just in the background, or they can be varying levels of dynamic and contribute to the story in some way and evolve over time. I came up with a design philosophy for this system as I was going, of keeping everything as modular and interchangeable as possible, reusing as much as I could, and making sure that the stats and behaviors and everything and traits were reusable. But then I instantly forgot about that, slipped back into my old ways in a caffeine-induced rage, and further derived, for some reason, characters into monsters and NPCs for absolutely no reason. Like literally, they're the same thing. The only difference between a monster and a village farmer should be the types of traits that they have, or the prefab that spawns, and the kinds of interactions they can do, but everything under the hood as far as ARCHIVIST is concerned should be the same. But no, I had to make everything twice as difficult. For creating these entities, I have templates which act as a basic blueprint for what can and can't go into a specific kind of character. An evil king isn't going to take the same information as a beggar, and certainly not the same as a monster. Not that that matters, because monsters have their own templates because I'm dumb. From there, I have a shit ton of scriptable objects of different types to populate the templates with juicy information such as traits, backgrounds, professions, and of course monsters have their own unique sets and are further derived for no reason, like physical traits, personality traits, because I have no internal consistency at all. What I'm learning from this is that I just want to make scriptable objects. That's it. That's like bubble wrap. Just put me in a room full of scriptable objects and I'll just sit there for hours, just popping away. Anyway, whatever. At the risk of lingering too long, I have, yes, 2 factories that take in templates and create monsters and NPCs separately, for some reason, and 2 sets of generated data types. And then I need to basically check everything twice for NPCs and monsters. Great. Apart from the obvious redundancy of making monsters and NPCs like fundamentally different in the system, but to people going, but Sean, your system of inheritance of an entity class is bad and you should have it entirely component-based and just a blank slate with different components attached to it to define the different, shush. I'm covered in baby vomit and I have had exactly 0 sleep this week. I'm gonna do it this way. Now that we have entities, we need stuff for them to do. Thankfully, there wasn't much of a chance for me to jump headfirst into inheritance hell with this, though it has its own special circle of hell. For events, we have event templates similar to entities, but we also have an event context. The context sits in the scene and probes it for information like an annoying mosquito torturing me in the middle of the night in order to create a snapshot of the world and see what can and can't happen next with events. When an event needs to check something, it kindly asks the context, can I do this? And it will either say yes or no. As part of the events we have memories, which, and by God I have no idea how this happened, are not scriptable objects. Events create memory strings which are stored in dictionaries within the entity data itself and used to create their own version of events, their participation and how they felt about it. The history generator might log something like, there's a fight between a monster and a hero at this date and place or whatever. But the hero might remember, I fought for my life and I just barely survived, I'll be more careful next time, and then they might be more cautious in future when engaging with monsters again. So you have a historical version and you have a personal version that has different effects. Slap in a ton of context preconditions, entity conditions, and we can have events here doing all sorts of cool things. We can also set the scope of the event, which pertains to what events affect the most, but we will talk about that in a second. The keen-eyed among you might have noticed that an entity requirement there with a check type of aspect. What is an aspect? Well, you know in Cultist Simulator where events can take a range of different cards, but instead of needing a specific card, necessarily, it just needs any card with the aspect of blah. Well, it's like that. Sometimes I don't want to check a specific memory or look for a specific trait. Sometimes maybe an event that looks for a volunteer to defend a town can be triggered by anyone with combat experience, so instead of writing this big-ass check where it looks through every single thing, and I just have it pull an entity with an aspect of war, or adventure, or whatever else. And these aspects are tied to professions, like if someone was a soldier once, or their backstory, like if they got into lots of fights as a kid or whatever. They carry an aspect that basically describes what the thing is. They're also a great way that I could distinguish between different kinds of entities. Like say I didn't have different character entities, like an idiot, I could give people and NPCs the aspect of humanity, and monsters have an aspect of monstrosity. But then people who are, say, corrupted could have aspects of both. Or you could have a monster that has aspects of humanity and is actually friendly, like a talking monster merchant or something. You know? It's just way more flexible. So then with all the stuff, what happens is I have this history generator that cycles through and checks events hierarchically. Cycles through and checks events in a hierarchy based on the scope of the event, right? So starting from global events, such as political shifts or apocalyptic kind of events, wars, that sort of stuff, to regional, smaller wars, settlements being formed, different storms and weather patterns, monsters appearing, whatever, to local events, things that happen within a specific area, like a thieves guild setting up in a town, all the way down to personal entity level. The idea being that big events affect small ones, and not so much the other way around, in theory. So for example, if there's a war going on, probably the local region that's just getting ravaged by soldiers won't be hosting their annual flower festival. Things like that. And then yeah, basically we cycle through entities, track a butt ton of information, and then run different events. The way that I stop this from spiraling out of control is that static and basic entities don't normally participate in events, normally just complex ones. But as I mentioned before, basic dynamic entities can become complex through certain events and traits and things like that. One tricky part with this was how do we start? Like, how do I start the generation? If entities are meant to be born, created, and then grow through life experience, how do I start a world? Do I just have a ton of babies everywhere? I can't have towns because there was no one to settle the towns. But luckily, past Sean already addressed this. So in order to solve the chicken or the egg problem that comes from having history generated by entities, I have a handful of special, unique entities that will be created at the start of history, and those are called seed entities. I mentioned that a big event called the Shattering created the current world that you play in by breaking up bigger countries and continents from like the old world and then scattering them around the world into islands. And, you know, civilization had to sort of rebuild. Well, seed entities are entities that existed before the Shattering and survived. They start midway through their lives. They start with a handful of pre-generated experiences and relationships and backstories, and they go on to generate and spawn the rest of the lore. They could be ancient monsters that have lived for thousands of years and give birth to all other monsters, or they could be more abstract, like a group of survivors that all band together and go on to form a town. Side note, I drafted a template for group entities, and I think it's pretty cool, and I think I could do some cool things with it, but it doesn't work. So I'll talk about that next time. So in order to track what's going on, I've sunk way too much time into creating this beautiful, just stunning, really, history viewer, which lets me track all kinds of information such as specific entities, what they were up to, what year they were up to those things, what kinds of events they've been in, what their role was, what their memories are, what their own perspective is, and it's helped me a ton to see where things are working and where things aren't working, and also just what's going on, because there's no actual implementation, so trying to figure out what's actually being generated is really difficult. For example of an actual generation using this system and using the viewer, I've created a couple of different templates for characters and backstories, and I've set up a simulation where we have one seed entity going around sort of doing stuff, and I've created some templates. So for example, I have an event where they might fight a monster, and either they'll win or they won't, depending on their stats. Now, for now, this is just random, but once I've fixed up the monster entities, this will be an actual monster that already exists that you'll fight, so probably like an ancient one or something. But anyway, you fight a monster and either they'll win or they won't, depending on their stats. If they win, they're like, sick, they get a bit stronger, life goes on, and that would, go on to trigger other events. But in this situation, if they lose, I've generated a traumatic memory that they keep, which tells them that they nearly died. Then based on that, I have an event that can trigger due to traumatic memories, where the entity goes on a journey of self-discovery. And this event has multiple endings and outcomes as well. They could just find some inner peace, but one of the rare outcomes, depending on their skills in other situations, is that they might discover something cool. Boom, new memory of a discovery. So then this other event, which is a discovery event, is looking for a memory of an entity who has just discovered something and finds some ancient ruins. And again, multiple outcomes. But one of them is that the ruins might be a great spot to make a settlement. So if the entity is famous enough, they might settle down and create a settlement. And that settlement is created, spawned into the game, and will be a place that either still exists that the player can go to, or it'll be destroyed at some point, and the player might stumble across the ruins themselves. That's how it works. Things happen, things link together, things do stuff, and stuff leads to more stuff. Of course, obligatory, this is nowhere near done, but it's a start, and it's concrete now. I have systems that do stuff, it's not just some idea floating around in my head. And now I just layer it. I layer it, refactor it. I'm gonna make the NPCs and monsters the same thing, and work on the aspects, and then it's just a matter of populating backstories and traits and all that sort of stuff. Then I link it to gameplay. Well, I'll do that first actually. I don't need a huge simulation for that. I'll link it to gameplay. So things like rumor propagation, so different NPCs, depending on their level of knowledge, will have heard about different events that happened, and all of this is stored. Like we have memories, the history stores the events, and the entities can draw from it for things like dialogue, quest generation, and all that sort of fun stuff. And all of this is in my tech doc that I wrote, and I spent a ton of time writing instead of working on this video. And that's it. Yeah. I'm going to bed now.